Okay, so welcome to a special edition of News from the Roots. I have John DeVille on with us, and this is kind of a hi, John. Thanks again for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me
This
back.
is a repeat performance. Well, actually, it's a post-performance, a report following up on the last show we did when you were about to go to Raleigh.
Right.
We thought 15,000 people at the outside were going to show up.
Right.
And then there was a terrible rainstorm, which was terribly discouraging, and only 30,000 people showed up, actually, which is remarkable.
It was remarkable. It was, I left Franklin that morning at 2:30 with a former student who drove me from Franklin to Asheville, and we had 3 young buses packed to the gills with teachers from all over Western North Carolina, and we pulled up into NCAE headquarters at about 9:30 in the morning, and it was just bus after bus after bus after bus, and there's a traffic jam of buses on the exit ramp, and we're all holding up the poster towards each other, and people are piling off the buses, and there's just this general look of amazement on everybody's face, like, this really happened. There's really all of us here, all of us, and we just and more and more and more people showed up. And so we kind of mill around for about 30 minutes. We'd been off the bus, my group had been off the bus for about 5 minutes, and the skies opened up, so we all got out our ponchos and our umbrellas. But fortunately, that part of the rain only lasted about 15 minutes, and the sun came back out, and we marched down Jones Street. And that was unbelievably heartwarming, not just because of the camaraderie of the other people who were marching on the streets, the fellow teachers, but all the spectators who were lining the streets, clapping for us, cheering for us, people coming out of their offices onto their balconies and clapping and rooting us on. That felt really, really, really good. And so we had that march in the morning, and then about 3,000 of us filed into the General Assembly to try to meet with legislators. And we had lunch, and we networked and shared stories, and then had another rally around 3:30, 4 o'clock, and stumbled back to the buses. And I got back on my bus literally 5 minutes before it really came down. So I got really lucky and came back and put my head back on my pillow at 1 in the morning. So it was almost a 24-hour day. Got up the next day, taught, and then I had 2 meetings that afternoon, a 2-hour meeting of parents and teachers and the superintendent to talk about the local budget fight, and then a second meeting with the progressive group in Franklin called Forward Franklin to fill them in on what we were doing with the local budget. So, and that Tuesday before the Wednesday had gone to the preliminary budget meeting at the courthouse for the. So it was a packed 3 days. It took that whole weekend to kind of catch back up.
Well, I admire your resilience, and it's great to see that so many other teachers felt inspired to do that.
The energy was, we were feeding off of each other, and that's what happens in a movement like that, is that, when you're by yourself, where it's just 2 of you, you can get exhausted quickly. But when you see somebody else who's walking and marching, and that energy is just infectious.
And so that Wednesday, many of the local school officials and local governments cooperated with the teachers and closed down the schools or called it a teacher work day, or how did that work?
Well, there were different levels of cooperation. So some school systems had no choice. So how much they really were supporting us and how much they weren't, I think most of them were. But some of them had absolutely no choice. They did not have enough substitutes to be able to hold school. But there were some that just had immediately stepped up, and one of the ones that was really, I think, Durham had made, the folks who work in Durham, the Durham Association of Educators is just, exceptionally well organized, and they've got a great leadership team, and that was the first domino, and then Chapel Hill went. I thought, okay, maybe that's it. And then Charlotte went a few days later. I was like, wow, that's huge. And then after Charlotte happened, it was like watching popcorn pop, and the old style was just pop, 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 pop. And so by the day of the march, 64% of the students were not able to be in class that day, and we were castigated for them not being able to have class that day. It was very interesting to hear that criticism from Majority Leader Berger and from Speaker Moore, that they were upset that students weren't being taken care of, which is the only time in the last 7 years I've heard them really be genuinely concerned about what goes on in the classroom. The day we showed up in Raleigh to advocate for our students, that was the day that they were upset. So yes, it was work day, but most schools were making it up, either with extra time added to the day or taking another work day that was planned for the end and having that day. So in fact, very few students actually were cut short of instructional time because of the march.
And so, did you get to speak with some specific legislators?
I'm able to speak with my legislators whenever I want to. Jim Davis's office is around the corner from the high school, and while Jim and I agree on absolutely nothing, and I don't think he's taken too seriously anything I've ever said to him, his door, I will give him this, his door has always been open, and he's always been, he'll sit down and talk with me. Kevin Corbin I ran into twice in the past month at a local microbrewery, and we've had cordial conversations. Again, there's fairly substantial disagreement on policy. Kevin would maintain that that he's doing the right thing, that they're doing the right thing, and he would say I'm impatient.
With what?
That I want things returned at the very least. I want spending levels on a per pupil spending levels returned to 2008 levels. That's been our.
Said this.
No, I have said that I want it returned to 2008 levels at the very minimum, and his response would be baby steps. We're getting there. Mm-hmm. I'm not quite convinced that we're getting there.
Listening to Jim Davis, you'd think that North Carolina is spending more than it's ever spent before.
Well, it certainly is. That's right. That's right. It's right. If you adjust for inflation and you adjust for the number of students, there's no way. We're 6, 7, 8% back of where we were in 2008, and that doesn't sound like an awful lot, but when you see how that plays out in the classroom, there's a tremendous hit there.
Which is funny. The day that was happening, on that Wednesday, NPR did a story on it, and they interviewed some of the leadership, some of the Republican leadership, and they were all going, that they couldn't get a sentence out trying to rationalize their positions. And most of them would come out saying, "Well, I'm for the teachers. We support what they're doing. We're not always the same on how to get there." All kinds of fumbling, mitigating statements. But I think that they were a little more than a little shocked at the size of the demonstration and the enthusiasm behind it and the public support that was being shown for the teachers from people who were emailing them and calling them, and I think it was very powerful, and it shook them to their souls.
I agree with you 100%, and I think the best evidence that they were shaken to their souls, to their cores, was the fact that we just had a historic moment with the budget that was just what was passed, and then Governor Cooper has vetoed it. Now, today, tomorrow, Monday, they're in the process of overriding his veto. But what is, I think, the best evidence that they were shaken to the core is the fact that they allowed absolutely no debate whatsoever on the budget.
Right.
They were not going to be put in a position to have a Democrat in the House or the Senate make a motion to adjust per pupil spending, whether it's for supplies, textbooks, teacher assistants, more teachers in the classroom. They weren't going to listen to any of that argument because they did not want to be on the record voting no on that when they were staring down the barrel of the November election. I think that was, and the other big issue that people who are smarter than I am, who follow what goes on Jones Street, that the other reason that they did not want to have a debate is their aversion to passing a red flag law in North Carolina. They don't want to have a law in North Carolina that if somebody has good evidence that a person that they are close to, related to, living with, family member, significant other, is intending somebody in their circle harm, red flag law would allow you to go to law enforcement and make that claim and have law enforcement investigated, and if there is good cause, temporarily seize that person's firearms. Other states have red flag laws. The majority in North Carolina General Assembly doesn't even want to discuss it.
I don't understand. You lost me here a little bit.
Okay.
How did that come into play?
Well, what I'm citing is that there again sharper political pundits than myself who would make the case that there were two main reasons that the General Assembly did not want to have a debate during this past budget session. And red flag. They didn't want to talk about. They didn't want to be on the record opposing a red flag law. It doesn't play well with the middle.
And the other reason was
they don't want to discuss education spending. They don't want to be on the record opposing any type of increase, because clearly from what happened on May 16th and what is happening in county, it wasn't just what happened in Raleigh. It's what was happening elsewhere in the state on May 16th. There were simultaneous demonstrations in solidarity with what was going on in Raleigh, but the op-eds are from Murphy to Manio in support of public education. The Facebook pages and posts are in solidarity with returning us to 2008 levels, and they don't want to have that discussion.
And they are adamant in this position because of just their political philosophy.
Anytime you get into motive, you're always on somewhat shaky ground.
Okay.
So, but I will. But that won't stop me. Where angels fill to tread, I will walk right out there on that thin ice. I think there are a variety of reasons. I think there are some who really have total contempt for public education, and that's it.
Because they have a libertarian philosophy.
I don't know. Again, I think it really gets down at a granular level. I mean, what were the causes of the American Revolution, and why did people fight the American Revolution? And if you're going to be intellectually honest from a historiographical position, you really have to get down at a granular level. There were multiple reasons, but if you want to go, but I think again, some of them just don't want to spend the money. I think some of them wanted. This is what you see across. If you take Social Security, you take health care, you take public education, you take public transportation, or public incarceration. If you take where all the big public expenditures of money are, if you're a capitalist, if you're an entrepreneur, you see that as an area that you can move into, and you could skim a certain percent off the top and put that money in your pocket. So, healthcare is a great example. Healthcare admin costs, I think, in this country are somewhere between 23, 25. They were up as high as 30%, 30 cents of every dollar was going to do admin for healthcare. That's going into the shareholders' pockets. It's going to the CEO's pockets, whereas it costs like 3% admin to do Medicaid, Medicare. We do public education on the cheap. But there's still a lot of money. On a per basis, there's a lot of money. So if Friedman Enterprises looks at that and says, hey, I could come in and I could diminish the quality of services and take 10 to 15, 20% of what they're currently spending and put that in my pocket, that's a decent business model.
Well, it may be that a certain sector of the business community thinks that way, but I think a vast majority of the business community looks at the workforce, and since so much of large enterprise has to do with high-tech industry these days, you have to be thinking to yourself, my God, we need a well-educated workforce.
That's right.
And so it's in my interest to see that public education is well-funded.
That's right. And so, business interests are not monolithic. They're competing business interests. So, Friedman Enterprises that, produces software in Sylvan, North Carolina, wants that educated workforce that you just spoke of.
Yeah, but so does the automotive industry, so does every industry that has anything to do with communication, transportation, even
but if you're able to get enough, if there's just enough that squeak through, and your community college system is robust enough maybe that's enough for you to not raise your hand to raise a fuss. You can look at Best NC, which is a consortium of large corporations across the state, which is, positions itself as a public education advocate. I have a lot of problems with a lot of their philosophies, a lot of their thinking, but you can just take a look at Best NC, and there's infighting of the people who are in Best NC. Some would move to privatize it, thinking that there's a profit to be made there. Others might want to privatize it because they think privatization would make it ipso facto better. And then there's another constituency sitting at that table that's like, I don't want to do either one of those. I want to take what's existing out there and return it to the robust quality that we had in the late 90s and early 2000s. So
I have a slightly different perspective on this. I think that what we're seeing is the result of essentially one entity that is causing this philosophical direction in North Carolina, regardless of what's good for the local economy. It has nothing to do with the local economy. It has to do with the Koch brothers and the American Legislative Exchange Council, and the fact that they have essentially purchased the North Carolina General Assembly through campaign contributions and lobbying efforts, and they are directing what's happening in the North Carolina General Assembly. They own Jim Davis, they own Tim Moore, they own what's the Senate?
Well, they had Ellis was, Senator Ellis was the ALEC Legislator of the Year his last year in the General Assembly.
Right. I think that North Carolina has been a laboratory for legislation put out by the Koch brothers and the American Legislative Exchange Council, from voter ID laws to the defunding of public schools, to redistricting in North Carolina. All of that has been designed, and this is not a conspiracy theory. We know this.
I read the same literature. I'm pretty sure I read the same literature you do. I don't disagree that the Koch brothers, and we left out Art Pope and Civitas, and ALEC. I think all of those forces are important. They are significant. They are to be reckoned with. But I think it's a mistake to say that that's the sole reason, or maybe even the main reason. They don't get anywhere without voters coming along. And voters came. I mean, I think there was a rebuke in this state. There was a reaction to President Obama. There was a reaction to the Affordable Care Act, and we can debate on whether or not what the roots of that rebellion were. But there was a rebellion in this state in 2010, and you take what was a nascent rebellion that has all kinds of historical antecedents, and then you take on top of that Koch brother money, Art Pope money, and you get that synergy that created the General Assembly that we got in January of 2011. And then they followed up with that with gerrymandering the state to entrench their position. So, I'm a wannabe historian, and as a wannabe historian, we're trained to be deeply skeptical of any type of explanation that has monocauses. Mm-hmm. There's always a convergence. But I don't think it's really worth arguing what, except for looking at strategy down the road. Right. I mean, how much we could argue is Pope, Koch, and ALEC, are they 90% responsible, 30% responsible? They're significantly responsible. But I do think that it's important, if we're going to have an intelligent response, a response that's going to work for us at the polls, that we have to look beyond just those three and focus.
Well, let me rephrase that a little bit. Okay. In that the issue and the cause, in my perspective, is the money in politics, of which the Koch brothers and American Legislative Exchange Council are emblematic. But in general, there's also, yes, you're right. I mean, there's also Duke Energy,
or Joe Schmo, who just has convinced himself, or maybe through watching too much Fox News and listening to too much Rush Limbaugh, has convinced himself that somehow big government is a problem for is a reason for all my woe in the
Right,
world.
but you'd have a hard time convincing me that what's happening in the General Assembly is reflective of the majority opinion in North Carolina.
Well, that we are 100% in agreement on that, and we know that what you just said is true, because we can look at the percentage of people who vote center left versus people who vote center right and far right, and the percentage is far more on our side than it is on the other.
Not even in terms of left and right, but if you ask people, do you think we should fund public education well and educate our population well, you're going to get 70-75% of the people who say yes.
They will, but the question, and again, from working on campaigns, you will get people who will nod always on that.
Yeah, you get 25% of people who think we should be ignorant. You know?
But they will nod yes to that. Will they get off the couch for that? Will they go to the polls?
Right.
And so there's a difference between I agree with the position and then what pollsters refer to as an intensity level. And as much as I want the intensity level to be out there for public education, and we are starting to see it, one of the things a point I think that is fascinating to me is at the local budget fight. The highest percentage of people who came towards my direction in the past 2.5-3 months were Republican teachers. That's who came my way. Now that wasn't true a year ago. That wasn't true 3 years ago. That was not true 5 years ago. We are seeing legislative overreach. We are seeing such a strangulation. We're seeing such an isolated perspective that it's got this death grip on so many things that we have relied on since the 1930s, that people who would identify themselves as being conservatives are going, wait a minute, that's too much, and public schools are important, and yeah, by God, I'm going to fight for them.
Yeah. Well, left, right, and center, I think people understand the value of education.
They understand it. Will they fight for it? And that's always been. I think that's important.
That's correct. But in general, I mean, with strictly speaking, from a constitutional perspective, it's supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people. You're not supposed to have to get out in the street and fight for everything. You're supposed to be able to vote, and it should be one person, one vote. And the scale should not be tipped in one direction or another. It should be reflective of the majority. What's happening in government should be reflective of the majority, and it isn't right now on so many levels.
Yeah, but I think even in our own history, you'd have a hard time going back and looking at 200 plus years of constitutional democracy in this country and finding that civics class version that you just laid out. That's more, I think, the exception than the rule. I think realpolitik tends to rule the day.
Right.
And
that's true.
And has historically.
But it's what we strive for.
That's right. That's right. But so there it comes again. Strive, fight. It's never going to really come. I mean, it's so the days that we're just lucky and it just falls on our lap. Okay, we ought to be thankful for that. But most of the time, we're going to have to fight for it.
Yeah. And so, what do you think will come out of this Wednesday, this demonstration? Is there something else being planned now?
Okay.
What's next?
So there were several of us who asked that question back in the middle of April as this was starting to unfold, never really anticipating it was going to get as big as it did. But so if this thing gets big, what are we going to do? And I would say right now I see three major forces congealing, two of them with quite specific outlines. One group, which was the spearhead of Durham shutting down and really taking the lead, was the Durham Association of Educators, which is, they created several years ago a caucus within NCAE called Organized 2020, which is a progressive coalition within NCAE with a lot of emphasis on social justice. And then there is another group of which I'm a part, which is Red for Ed NC. You can find us online at Red for the number 4.
So you're wearing the color.
That's right. Well, this is what all teachers across the country are wearing. So, but redforednc.com. We have a statewide advisory council, and we just finished yesterday our declaration of an educational vision for the school children of North Carolina. We have sent that out to over 1,000 people who have signed up to the website, and we plan to publicize that declaration on the 4th of July. And then we are working on steps. In fact, the advisory board is meeting in Raleigh this coming week. We've got two days of meetings, and at that point we will put together our strategies, our plans for the fall and early spring. And so the metaphor I've been using, and there are some people who are in both organizations. So the metaphor I have used to describe it to other people in the group or outsiders is the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And so you had the Union Pacific and you had the Central Pacific. And the Union Pacific is coming out of Sacramento and looking at the Sierra Nevadas, and how in God's name are we going to get a locomotive and a whole train of boxcars behind it over Donner Pass? That just doesn't seem possible. And Crazy Judah goes out there and he figures out how to get over Donner Pass. And that's slow going, but they do figure it. And then you've got the other line that I guess comes out of Independence, Missouri, or St. Louis, I forget, I shouldn't. But they're laying track then going towards Sacramento. And so one is, slow and tedious, and the other one is just laying track down as fast as you can go. And then they met, at Promontory Point, Utah, where the Golden Spike was driven. I think that that's what will happen. Ultimately, I think there are two approaches to recruiting teachers and other stakeholders. I don't think that either one has all the answers, but I think between the two of us, we cover a lot of bases. Between the two organizations, we cover a lot of bases. And I think when it really gets down to some key moments, I think those two organizations will come together and we'll drive the Golden Spike, hopefully we'll drive that Golden Spike into the heart of this insanity, which has strangled public education so horrifically in the past 7-8 years.
And what form will that Golden Spike take? I mean, will it be a formation of a teachers union?
Well, the phrase that we're using is a teacher congress. I'm not sure what terminology the Organized 2020 group is using. There is no teacher union in North Carolina. There's a teacher association, NCAE. There is no collective bargaining permitted in North Carolina under North Carolina law. So,
is that going to be challenged?
Well, you could challenge that. You would need a change in the law, or you would need a successful court challenge. Rattlesnakes don't commit suicide. I don't see the General Assembly passing a law, saying, we just had it wrong all these years. We need collective bargaining back in North Carolina. So I think, but you've got creative people. You hang out with teachers for a few days, other teachers from across the state, and there's a lot of creative possibilities. Which we're tossing around those possibilities, at the moment, and. We're not going to show our cards, but there are other possibilities that we could put into play.
Have you been in touch with any of the groups that have organized in other states?
I personally have not, but I know that Brian Prophet and Todd Warren from Organized 2020 have been in touch with people. I know that Angie Scioli, who is really she's the big mama, the Red for Ed NC is her brainchild. I know she's been in touch with teachers from Arizona. So yeah, we have what worked, what didn't work, and we can read online. We can see what seemed to work. And one of the things that's the common denominator, it was not the existing leadership in any of these states that made it happen. You know, you look at Oklahoma, I think is the most incredible story, where you had a teacher who was maybe 3 years experience, and she just started a Facebook page, and the thing just took off. If you frame it right, and if the elements are already lined up, then you know you can create something.
I mean, the perception is, for me anyway, and I really am on the periphery of this. I've been following it, but not in the depth that I would if I were a teacher.
Right.
Probably. The perception is that this is like spontaneous combustion. It happened in West Virginia, and it happened in Oklahoma, and it happened in Arkansas, and it happened in Arizona, and then it happened in Colorado, and that this has not been a coordinated effort from any top organization or anything.
Right.
Like this is growing like mushrooms,
Right.
and spores of mushrooms,
Right.
because there's this vacuum that has to be filled, that there is this need. Obviously, you know, there's pressures from within and without that are making this happen. And it's happening in North Carolina in the same way.
It certainly wasn't coordinated. What was coordinated, to go back to Alec and the Koch brothers, that was what was coordinated.
Yeah.
And that was coordinated, and that certainly had a collective cumulative effect in several states in this country. Along with, some states had historically were very pro-labor, pro-public education, like Wisconsin, and then like Wisconsin just took a sharp turn. Other states which were already, I don't know what the really good word is, but certainly not a national leader in any shape of the word in public education, like Kansas and Oklahoma, got way worse. And so what you're seeing is a reaction, is a collective reaction to. I think the common denominator is this: we all took a hit, and we knew it was a hit, and maybe it wasn't fair that we took the hit, but everybody took a hit in 2009, 2010 because of the Great Recession. Okay, we got that, and we understood it was going to be a while coming out of the ditch. Well, we've been, the rest of the country's been more or less out of the ditch for 5 or 6 years, except for public education has been left behind. And it's like, okay, you keep talking about all this great recovery. We are extolled to no end of the virtues of supply side economics, but I don't see anything on my plate. What's up with that? I don't see where are my textbooks? Where are my supplies? Where are the teacher assistants? You keep telling us that supply side economics is great. You keep telling us that tax cuts for the wealthy and for corporations are going to generate all this extra business, all this extra revenue, and we're all going to be living in some sort of paradise. And I ain't seeing, and so there was that collective awakening across the country, and that's what that was the organizing principle. Is like, we keep hearing all these stories of awesomeness because of conservative principles, and we didn't see it in the classroom.
And to be fair, it's not just teachers.
Oh God, no!
And it's the economy is doing great in terms of generating wealth, but all that wealth is going to the upper 1% of the population. And everybody else is being left behind. People are working for wages everywhere that are lower than they were in 1960 in real dollars.
And you bring up a fantastic point right there, and this is something, a criticism that teachers are getting across the country. I've certainly heard it here in North Carolina. I've certainly heard it in my own county, and the criticism is coming from that worker who is making $10 an hour, $11 an hour, $12 an hour. I was talking to a maintenance guy in my own county. He's been at it for 15 years at least. He's making $30,000 a year. He's doing back-breaking work for $30,000 a year. Work that will slowly over time destroy his hips, will destroy his knee joints. It's not good. And we treat those people who do the hardest work in our country, we treat them as if they are something that has been swept off the street. And so I think a challenge for teachers and for any other large group of public sector employees who have been treated poorly, but compared to people who are doing maintenance and bus driving and that kind of thing, they've been treated god-awfully. And if we don't reach out to them and pull them into our circle, what's going to happen? We know this from history, we know this from the present. What's going to happen is that those people who are in charge, who are making the policy, are going to foment division among the workers, among, try to get the public sector employees to fight with other public sector employees, and that takes the heat off of them. So I think one of our challenges is to reach out to other public sector employees who are doing work that is, physically more demanding than ours, maybe not intellectually more demanding, maybe not spiritually or emotionally more demanding. And I think emotional labor is so much of what we do. But we've got to reach out to those people that have been left behind for the last 3 decades, not just the last 7 years.
Yeah, because the Trumps and the leadership in North Carolina, what they're telling people is, it's not your employer that's the problem, it's not the state that's the problem, it's the immigrants' fault.
But yeah,
they're competing with you for jobs.
Or China.
Yeah, so demonstrate against them.
Right.
Worry about
Yeah,
them.
exactly.
And worry about the blacks.
Right. Yes.
And others. That's who they try to sow division,
Yes.
as you said. And if we can just communicate the reality of the situation. In 1968, when I took my first full-time job, the minimum wage while I was getting paid, I think it was $2.10 and maybe it was $2.25 an hour. In real dollars today, an equivalent minimum wage would be about $22.50. So even calling for a $15 minimum wage is not bringing us up to standard. And to boot, the problem I have with just the $15 minimum wage is that's not only is it not enough, but it has to be indexed to inflation. Otherwise, it's meaningless.
Right.
Because in a few years, that $15 an hour is not going to be worth what it is today. So we have to tack that on whenever we demand a higher wage.
Great.
So tell us, show us some of the charts you.
Okay.
created.
Well, no, I've got some charts, but
Yeah.
let me go over just a couple of. I've got a list of maybe some highlights here from the budget that I think might be interesting. So I want to start with what I think is just an incredible story that is getting almost no play in the press. So here it goes. In the budget that was passed late last year, the federal budget that was passed late last year, there was $74 million in new dollars earmarked for North Carolina for early childhood care and development. Okay, here's an additional 70, on top of anything else that we might be getting from the feds. Here is $74 million new dollars for your 5 and under kids. Go forth and prosper. What did the North Carolina General Assembly do? Did they take that $74 million and add it to what they were already spending? No, that would be too kind and too commonsensical. So what they did is they took $24 million and added it in, and then they put all $74 million in. Okay, so let me make that clear. They put all $74 million in from the feds. Then they took out $50 million of state dollars that was in there out, and then took that to help finance the new tax cuts that go into effect in January of 2019. And it's heartbreaking. There's the Frank Porter Graham Institute, which I just recently became familiar with, which does a tremendous amount of research, high quality research on the impact of pre-K education, especially for low-income kids, especially for English as a second language kids, and they get tremendous benefit. And we just took $50 million that was intended to go from them away to go to tax cuts. And so if I don't get anything else out today as to what impact the budget had and what kind of shenanigans this group just pulled in Raleigh, let's make sure we understand that happened. Item number 2 on the list of horribles. It's a 2-for-1 here. And this is House Bill 514. Out of curiosity, 514, have you heard of it? 514? Okay. So I've got 2 people who are educated in the room, who keep up with the news, and are in tune. And so this isn't getting much traction yet, but it will. 514 isn't likely just to be historic for North Carolina. It could be historic on a national basis, but especially for North Carolina. So let me make 514 sensible and understandable to you. We got to go back to 1933. 1933, North Carolina passed what's called the Schools Machinery Act. So in the depths of the Depression, our state government said the Depression is creating pockets in our state of intense poverty. We are becoming a state of intensely have and have-nots. That's not right. That's not how you run a state. All right. So what we're going to do, says the state of North Carolina, we're going to take the tax burden. We're going to take most of the tax burden away from Haywood, Macon, Jackson, Caldwell, Wake, Orange counties. We're going to take that tax burden away, and we're going to assume it at the state level and create what was called the State Equalization Fund to try to give every kid in North Carolina a level playing field. Okay, so that's been really,
that's quite a progressive thing that happened.
And look, and we were, if you I'm a student, I'm a hardcore student of 1920s, 1930s era North Carolina progressivism.
Does that include black school, or probably not? Or
well, it's yes and no. They come up. They don't come up as much as the white schools. Okay, so and that's really, if
this
you look,
was the year of separate but equal.
Yeah, well, it's you got separate but again, in North Carolina, it was probably still better to be black as a black public school student in North Carolina in 1940 than it would be a black high school student in Alabama
or Mississippi.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that was a governing philosophy. And then if you look at the new Constitution that came out around '72, and you look at Article 9, and every hardcore North Carolina public education advocate knows Article 9 by heart, or almost by heart, that that public education is a constitutional right for the children of North Carolina. What HB 514 does is going to allow individual municipalities to have their own charter schools. Now, Matthews, Menhill, Cornelius, that area outside of downtown Charlotte, they have wanted their own separate schools for some time. You got to remember that Charlotte's one of the the centers of in the nation for the fight over integration. Swan versus Mecklenburg. Okay, that's Charlotte right there. That's the famous busing case. So, and Charlotte, to its credit, was one of the leaders in the country in integration. Once they got over the hump of busing, okay, you had white flight, but you had magnet schools, and there were lots of stories of positive stories, incredible stories of successfully integrated schools in Charlotte in the mid to late 70s up through, say, the mid 80s. And then you really start to see it start to flow back to a pre-Brown era. And one chart I could show you is that bottom graph right there shows you that's 4 different data sets, and one is the level, what the demographics are of Charlotte, Mecklenburg overall, and then I can't see through the paper right here, but it shows you what the demographics are of Matthews, Menhill, Cornelius, and one other township.
That's what each of the bars are.
That's right. So each one, the blue bars are whites. Okay. So what basically is showing you is that you basically have got a 30-30-30 split, race split, and in Charlotte Mech overall. But then in these 4 townships right here, those 4 townships are vast majority white.
Okay.
Well, now they have the statutory authority to create their own charter school.
So it's resegregating.
Oh, yes. And then there's another part that's in the budget. Okay, so this was a local bill. This did not require the governor's signature because there was bipartisan opposition to this. But in the budget bill, municipalities now have taxing authority to tax specifically for schools. So, if you put Section 38.8 of the budget together with House Bill 514, you now have all the tools that you need to resegregate. Okay, and it gets worse.
Based on race. Right.
Okay, it gets worse. because now towns have the capacity to create, to be their own taxing source for schools. I think anybody who's followed this story for any length of time will tell you that the commitment, which has already been declining from the state when it comes to public education, that now it's easier for the state to say, well, look, if you guys in Silva really want to do it right, then tax yourselves. But don't ask the people of Charlotte, don't ask the people from Wilmington, don't ask the people from Greensboro to subsidize your schools in Silva. You guys want good schools in Silva? Then raise your own damn taxes.
So it's reversing the 1930s.
That's exactly right. You get an A. That's right. So you're taking an educational philosophy that's been in place since 1933, and it just got ripped up this week. Okay.
If it passes. And
well, 514's done. It doesn't need a governor's signature. It's passed, and the budget's passed.
Why doesn't it need a governor's signature?
Because it's a local bill. It only impacts those townships, and if it's a local bill, it's a great civics lesson. Okay, so if it's a local bill, if it's a bill that only impacts Silva, it doesn't need the governor's signature. Okay, but then the funding part needed, because that's a blanket thing, that needed to be folded into the budget. So they took the part that was going to the most obnoxious, most controversial, made that the local bill, and then took the funding part of it and put it in the budget. It's really clever. Machiavellian would absolutely bow to the genius of it all. And
this will be challenged in court.
Oh, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, I'm surprised that the briefs haven't been filed. I can imagine by next week, the week after, that you will see all kinds of lawsuits. 514, because, and here's the one, I'm going to go ahead and jump to it. It's Section 7 of 514 that I think, if you want to look that up, but I know that every nerd who's watching this wants to go look up 514, look at Section 7. Section 7 says that you can limit, you give first, not limit, but give first priority, which is a polite way of saying limit. You can give first priority to the students of Matthews or Medhill or Cornelius. First dibs go to the kids who live there. So, I mean, a friend of mine says, well, what's the difference between what's already happening in neighborhood schools versus what 514 does, which I thought was a good question. And my suggestion, which then other people, again, who are smarter than I am, agreed with, this takes what was already quickening and it hardens it, and then allows you to build a wall around your municipality and keep your tax dollars within those walls and not have to worry about the unwashed who are on the other side of the wall. So another great gem of the North Carolina of this budget session was 514 and Section 38.8 of the budget. We'll go on. We've expanded the voucher program. We've expanded the so we've added another $20 million. I don't know what it's up to, but this is, I think, a fascinating chart right here, and this one's a little bit larger. So I'll hold that one up. And what this chart down here on the bottom shows is what the different axes of accountability are for voucher dollars for North Carolina compared to other states. So in North Carolina, if your family is around 243, 246% of poverty level, you qualify to get a voucher for your kids. And that voucher is in the amount of $4,200. Okay? That won't allow you to go to Raven Gap and Noguchi. That won't allow you to go to a lot of private schools. It'll cut the cost down. But to maybe go to a little Christian school, a little Catholic school, one of the biggest charter school, one of the biggest charters in the United States, in the state of North Carolina, is getting these voucher dollars. In fact, the second biggest school in North Carolina that's getting voucher dollars is an all-Muslim school in Greensboro. Now, what's on this chart that's so damning? Well, let me read it to you right here. If you're going to get voucher dollars in North Carolina, does your school have to be accredited? Do you have to have state approval? And the answer is no. But in Cleveland, in D.C., in Indiana, Louisiana, Maine, Milwaukee, Ohio, Vermont, Wisconsin, you do. Is there a state required or defined curriculum? There isn't. 75% of the schools in North Carolina that are receiving voucher dollars are teaching that the earth was created 6,000 years ago. 75% So, and we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars.
So these are Christian-based school or fundamental.
Sure, that's right. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. And they're so no state-approved curriculum, no accreditation.
What about the teachers? Did they have?
Oh, you anticipate so well. Okay. Required teacher qualifications? Absolutely none in North Carolina. Can you raise your hand?
For school?
No, not for charter school. Charter school is a little bit thornier.
Public school, you don't have to be accredited?
At a charter school, I think 51% of the faculty have to be accredited, have to be certified. But the other 49%, I think I've got my facts right on that. In a charter.
But for public schools, they all have to be accredited.
Yeah, for Smoky Mountain, for Franklin High, for Pisgah, yeah, you've got to be highly qualified. Okay, right. But to get a voucher dollar, if you want to be a teacher in a voucher school, you don't have to. You know, you don't. I don't even think you have to pass a criminal records background check. Okay, if you can get yourself to the school, whatever they're calling school that week, then you're allowed to teach that.
So like nepotism and everything else.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have to participate in a state testing program? In North Carolina, you do not. Do you have to operate for the same number of days and hours? You don't. So then that leads you, and this slide isn't really worth zooming in on, but I'll just give you the story right here. So this was on WLOS just this past week. It's a little school in Rutherford called Trinity Christian School. Trinity Christian School in the last several years has gotten $327,000 in voucher money. Okay, they just caught the headmaster. They've charged her with embezzling somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000, and she did it with checks in the amount of $499.15 at a time to embezzle. They think close to $200,000, and of course the system is set up for exactly that type of abuse because there's no real oversight. Of what's going on.
Okay, to be clear, just to clarify something. When you say these schools operate on voucher money,
right?
That means that every family that decides to send their children to school, now they each child gets $4,200.
It's right.
So if you have 4 children, you get $16,000 or $17,000.
Yeah, if based on your family, let's say it's Mr. and Mrs. Friedman, and you've got 4 kids. Okay, so what's the poverty level for a family of 6? Okay, and if you are at no more than 246% of poverty, then you would get 4 vouchers.
And I just want to clarify something about that as well. The poverty level as defined by the federal government, which I think is the baseline that's being used here, is $11,800. So, and that was a poverty line that was arrived at back in the 1980s, I believe. And the federal government has not increased that over the years. So, I mean, if it was a fair poverty line, it would be somewhere in the $26,000 range or something like that. But now, if you're not living below the federally defined poverty level unless you earn less than $11,800.
Well, but I think I could pull up those numbers. I think like for a family of 6, I think you could make around $64,000 and still qualify for your 4 children.
Right, but now you're talking about 240%.
That's right.
Of the poverty level.
Right.
Okay. Now the other thing I wanted to clarify was the voucher money is not necessarily, and I might be wrong about this, but it's not necessarily the only money that charter schools are depending on. In some cases, let me just finish this thought. In some cases, charter schools get other state and local, like county funded.
Well, the reason I want to interrupt you is that we got 2 different kinds of schools. Okay. There's a charter school, and then there's a school that receive voucher money. Charter schools do not receive any voucher money at all. They get none. Okay, so let's take like what's the name of the charter school outside of Cashiers? Summit.
Right.
Okay, so you got Summit. So where does the money come from for Summit? The Jackson County School Board gets money for every kid that's in a public school in Jackson County. Then let's say that there's 100 kids that are at Summit Charter from Jackson County. Jackson County School Board then, let's say they get roughly $6,000 per kid, and there's 100 kids. So then Jackson County would write a check for $60,000 to Summit Charter. Okay, that's where the funding comes from. So instead of going to Smoky Mountain High or Fairview Elementary, it goes over to Summit Charter. And so the school board basically serves as a pass-through for the charter school. So that's how charters get their money.
So that's a publicly funded charter school.
Okay.
Basically.
Again, the charters are a little complicated, and Summit's a perfect example. Summit gets some of its money from public dollars. It also has then the option of going out and getting other money. So,
but it's not eligible for vouchers.
It's not eligible for vouchers. The voucher is they're getting more money than the voucher money. They're getting the full amount that North Carolina allocates on a per kid basis.
I got you.
Okay, so they would prefer to get it this way rather than the voucher money. But then Summit also then does fundraising. Serious, not just selling candles. They do big fundraisers. So the principal at Summit Charter, now check this out. The principal at Summit Charter gets 2 checks. He gets 1 check for being a principal of a North Carolina public school that happens to be a charter.
At the pay scale that the state
That's
pays.
right. And he also then gets another check, which he won't disclose, for being the head of fundraising. We think he makes around a little over $100,000 between the 2 checks, which is not bad.
Not a bad scam,
yeah, that's right. Okay. And see, and also then there are several kids. There are about 60 kids from Macon County, mostly from Highlands, who go to Summit Charter. Macon County has to write checks for those kids to go to that Jackson County charter. Okay.
Now the charter school, is it different in terms of the qualifications for teachers?
I think, like I said earlier, I could be wrong. I think it's 51%.
So the charter schools are under that same as private schools in terms of.
Well, privates have got none.
They've got none.
They don't. There's zero qualifications required. That's all up to that private school.
So it's weighing the scales in terms of charter schools. This system, basically. And,
it's certainly. I mean, it's
taking money out of the public schools.
Oh, there's no doubt. But
Yeah.
The most important thing that it's doing, and we pull back and look at the broad dynamic here. Christopher Lasch, who's one of my intellectual heroes, wrote Culture of Narcissism, wrote another book called The True and Only Heaven, Haven in a Heartless World. His last book he wrote before his death at a relatively young age was called Revolt of the Elites. And, I mean, this is a book that came out in the mid-'80s, I think. And it was about the top 20% giving its middle finger to the rest of society and saying, we're out of here. And we're going to create our own little enclaves. And again, I think that was an incredibly prescient book. I mean, that's almost 30 years ago he wrote that book. And there's been a lot of books come out in the past 10 years, and I just see those books as being rehashes of what Christopher Lasch said in the mid-'80s. The top 20% of the country, we keep saying top 1%, I think that's a mistake. You're isolating the problem to too small of a group. It's the top 20%. And the top 20% can live one way, and the other 80% are living some. And so, right there where that margin is where you really see the key moments of anxiety, this intense fear of, oh my God, my kid's not going to be in that top 20%, therefore he's going to be living under a bridge in a cardboard box. And I think, to kind of bring it back to our topic of what we're talking about here, I think 514 and that funding mechanism that's in the budget is going to accelerate an existing dynamic. What else do we have that they pulled this session? We could talk about, they want to talk about salary schedules. I'll leave you a printout right here, but I'll just cut to the chase with it. If we look at salaries, but what I've got on this chart right here is the old salary schedule from 2008 and 2009, and then the one that will go into effect for 2018, 2019. All right. What I did on this chart, I did some interesting math. I took inflation rates from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and applied it to the 2008-2009 salary schedule, and then compared it to what will be in effect for next fall. For the vast majority of teachers, if you just adjust the old 2008 one for inflation, and compare it to the new one that's coming out. We would have been way better off with this the old 2008 one, just adjusted for inflation. And if you take that plus the fact that we lost our longevity pay, it was taken away from teachers, it was not taken away from any other state employee, but it was taken away from teachers several years ago. So we've lost that as another income stream right there. We are way behind. So when the General Assembly, this is their favorite talking point, they'll talk about raises all day long. Well, first of all, in just current dollars, if you're year 23, year 24, you get no raise for next year. If you're from year 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, your raise for next year is 1.36%.
You're talking about teachers who have been in the system for that?
That's right. Well, that's right. Yeah. So if you're year 25 through 30, your pay is going to go up 1.3%, which is not even enough to keep up with inflation. And this is while our health insurance costs are going through the roof. So were you able to get that one right there? Okay. So, I mean, what this shows right here, I mean, over a 30-year career, okay, you're 59 grand short under the new schedule compared to the old one, just on salary. You're another 33 grand short on longevity. So if you add on how much you're short over a 31-year career, you're $93,000 short. So when they talk about raises, I'm like, I don't think you understand what the word means. And I think I can understand that, yeah, you want to look at this bruised and battered body and you want to talk to me about how good her hair looks from here to here, and ignoring the bruises and the wounds on the rest of the body. And we're not supposed to pay attention to that. And every time we question or we push back on that, they are deeply offended. Mm-hmm. You know, we're ungrateful. Mm-hmm. We are whiners, or to use another phrase that was applied to us, we're union thugs. So
union thugs.
That was another one that came out of an elected official, a member of the General Assembly, called us union thugs. Now, last thing. This came out in today's Franklin Press. We got in Macon County a total of $700,000 more than last year for current operating expense.
750.
No, that's okay. We've got $700,000 more for current operating expense, and then they just added on. I can't remember how much they had given us originally for capital outlay, but they just added another $250,000 for capital outlay for school security. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, and we were deeply grateful to get that. All that allows us to do on the current operating expense budget is to not cut any more positions. And we've lost about 50 over the past 7 years in Macon County schools. And it took a tremendous effort. It took Macon County Support Our Schools to be able to do this. It took NCAE. It took another group of teachers working on their own. And it took the folks from Forward Franklin. It took 4 separate groups coming together and putting a lot of posts up on Facebook and writing a lot of emails to county commissioners to the point they were really sick and tired of getting the emails. But I think we prevailed. They still have yet to finalize that amount right there. Now, this is a good news, bad news thing. This is good news in the short term, and it's good news in the short term for Macon County. But if you just go online and you search the budget fight from across the state, the counties are just being more and more strapped. So let me make this is a point I'm going to be making at the county commissioner meeting on Tuesday night. There's 2 ways we can fund schools, or there's 3 options. We can either just let them go to pot. That's one option. One option is that the state revert to its old spending ways and get us back to the per pupil spending of 2008, or the counties or towns now at 514 is that counties or town can pick up the slack, and we end up with have and have-nots. Here's why it's better to have the state do the taxing and not the local. Property taxes, while somewhat progressive, because I'll assume that the person who bought the $500,000 home is more able to spend some money in taxes than the person who lives in a $50,000 trailer. Okay, so there's
same rate.
That's right. So it's the same rate. Okay, so it's
really regressive.
And it's especially, and where it really gets regressive is if Avram Friedman is an old man who's lived in Jackson County,
Right.
and you've been here for 5 generations. You're cash poor but land rich, and you want to pass your land on. Those property taxes going up really make it hard for you. It's far more fair to be taxed on your income taxes at the state level. It's far more efficient, and it's far more egalitarian for the state to be the taxing and funding authority in the state for public education. But where we're going is to counties and municipalities, and it's going to resegregate us, and it's going to make us a state of have and have-nots, and it's going to have, you're going to accelerate this trend of revolt of the elites, because you're going to have the people there in the middle become more anxious. And who are they going to side with? The people that they aspire to be, or the people that they're leaving behind? And so this horrible gap, this polarizing viciousness that has seized the whole country, I think it's just going to get worse unless I think we're on the threshold of just losing it all. And I think really what goes on in public education is a symptom of a far larger pathogen that's taken us over.
At the same time, we're on the threshold of having a revolution in this country, and successfully, as we've seen in so many other states where the teachers have won in deeply red states, and when they got together and organized, they won. And I prefer to believe that that's the process that's happening.
I need people like you around me. I need to surround myself with more optimists. I mean, I'm a weird critter. I've got one foot deeply in cynicism, and I've got another in the faith, in your revolutionary faith or your progressive faith. That we will turn things around. I don't know.
Well, I like to say that I'm not an optimist. I'm a possibilist.
Okay, that's a good
I believe that we have to make things happen, and we have the ability to make things happen.
I like that. I'll take that. I'll take that.
So, John, thank you again for another wonderful discussion.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And I hope we'll continue this discussion yet again.
Okay.
I'm going to get in touch with you in about a month or so and see where this has all progressed. Okay. And let's move on.
All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Great weekend.
Thanks.